The front door clicked open under my key, and the sound of cardboard boxes scraping against hardwood flooring hit me before I even stepped fully inside my 5-bedroom penthouse at Meridian Towers. My mother stood in my entryway, holding out a duplicate set of my house keys toward my younger sister, her voice sharp and unapologetic, as if she had every right to rearrange my entire life behind my back. "Emma needs this place more than you," Diane said plainly, pressing the keys into Emma's palm. Without a single pause, my sister hauled another heavy moving box past me, heading straight down the hallway toward my primary bedroom. I stood frozen in the doorway, work bag still slung over one shoulder, the weight of a long workday still clinging to my shoulders. Sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows spilled golden light across the expensive floors I had worked more than a decade to afford. Every single dollar for Penthouse 3000 had come from my own late nights, missed vacations, and carefully hoarded bonuses. No one else had contributed a cent to this home. I watched Emma shove open my bedroom door and set her box down onto my bed. That was when the quiet, tight smile spread across my face. My hands were steady even though my heart hammered hard inside my chest. I lifted my phone, thumb tapping quickly through my contacts to dial Meridian Towers building security. "This is Lila Marla, owner of Penthouse 3000, I said into the receiver, keeping my tone level, doing my best not to let my shaking breath leak into my voice. "I have trespassers inside my private residence. Please send security up to my unit right away." My mother's face drained of color the second those words left my mouth. Her shoulders dropped, and she stepped forward, voice rising, urgent and angry. "What on earth are you doing? This is your family. You cannot call security on your own mother and sister." I lowered the phone from my ear but kept the line open, so the security dispatcher on the other end could still hear what unfolded inside my car. "You walked into my home, using keys I gave you only for genuine emergencies. You never asked my permission to move in. You just showed up with moving boxes and decided this was going to happen. That is trespassing, Diane." Emma reappeared from my bedroom, her eyes glistening. She set another box down in the hall, her posture "I have nowhere else to go," she said. "My lease through. Mom told me you understood, that you were okay with me staying here." "I never agreed to any of this," I replied. "Not a single conversation about you moving into my penthouse ever had me." Diane cut in, raising her hands like she was pleading a case to an invisible. "Blood matters more than deed. You have more space than you could possibly use all by yourself. It is only fair you share what you have built with your own flesh and blood. You us." A dull, familiar ache settled deep in my ribs. I had heard variations of this argument for years. Every time Emma landed in trouble, every time her life apart, the expectation landed on me to fix it. I had covered her emergency repairs, lent her rent money that was not back, sat up late listening to her cry over bad weather. Still, none of that meant she got to take over my home. Heavy footsteps echoed in the way. A moment later, firm knocks rapped against my house door. Javier, the head of building security, stood out in the corridor with one of his. Both men wore their official uniforms. I stepped back to let them cross the threshold. Diane spun toward the security officers immediately, changing her tone, trying to frame the whole situation as a messy private family misunderstanding that they had no business interfering with. She explained it was my mother, claimed there was an old verbal family promise that this home would be shared, but there was no written record of this. It was a story she had made up on the spot to justify taking possession of property. Javier listened carefully to her outburst, then turned. I confirmed I held full legal ownership of 3000, that I had not invited either of them to reside, and I wanted them and all their moving boxes. Diane's jaw tightened as she realized security was not going to side with her emotion. She shot me a bitter burn across the room, her voice dropping so only I could hear it over the quiet shuffle of theirs. "You think calling security solves this? This fight is not staying inside these four walls. Every single person in our extended family is going to hear exactly how you treated your own sister when she had nowhere left to turn." Security guided Diane and Emma out through the penthouse front door, stacking their cardboard boxes in the carpeted hallway outside Unit 3000. Javier gave them a clear verbal warning. They could visit only with Lila's explicit permission, and any attempt to force their way back in would result in formal trespass paperwork. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind them, and for a long moment I stood alone in my spacious living room, listening to the distant hum of downtown Austin traffic rise up past the floor-to-ceiling glass. My hands still shook, even though the immediate threat of them moving in was gone. I walked around the condo, straightening throw pillows that had been knocked askew, picking up packing tape scraps Emma had dropped across my hardwood floors. Every small leftover trace of their intrusion made my chest feel tight. This penthouse was supposed to be my safe haven, the reward for more than 10 years of grinding through long work weeks, turning down vacations to hit project deadlines, carefully tucking away every bonus check. Now the peace I had built here felt cracked. I locked both the deadbolt and the secondary security latch, then went to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, lighting up over and over again. Text messages started pouring in within minutes. First, from Diane. Paragraph after paragraph, each line steeped in heavy guilt. She wrote about how cold-hearted I had been, how humiliating it had been to be escorted out by building security in front of staff. She repeated that Emma had no safe place to sleep, that family was supposed to catch you when you fell, and that I was throwing away our blood ties over walls and square footage. A flood of forwarded messages followed. Relatives I spoke to only on holidays, cousins, my aunt, all copying me into group threads I had not known existed. Diane had wasted no time spreading her version of what had happened. I sank onto my leather sofa and scrolled through the messages. Most of them only had Diane's side of the story. She described me as wealthy and unfeeling, refusing shelter to my homeless younger sister. She omitted every critical detail, that she had copied my emergency spare key, that they had marched inside without asking, that they had begun hauling boxes into my master bedroom before I even got home from work. Several relatives replied with sympathetic comments directed toward Diane, and one cousin texted me privately, asking why I could not make just a little room for my own. My phone. I hesitated before answering, holding the phone to me. I expected more anger, more demands. Instead, her voice sounded worn down, almost. I know Mom went too far with how she did, Emma said. I could hear traffic noise in the background. She was still standing out in the building hallway. But I really have no else. My old landlord sold the building. My savings dried up. I'm sleeping out of my car tonight. Is there really zero possibility I could hear? Even just for a month while I hunt for a place? Part of me wanted in. The old familiar impulse stirred me. The urge to smooth everything over. To stop all the family gossip swirling around my name. If I let her stay for 30 days, the messages would stop. Diane would go down. Everyone would stop calling me cruel. But I could still picture her dropping her moving box onto my bed without a single word of permission. I knew a 30-day stay would easily stretch into 6 months. There would always be another excuse for Emma. The way this unfolded cannot, I told her, keeping my steady. You cannot break into my home my back. That line already got crossed. I can point you toward local housing assistance nonprofits. I can share listings for affordable apartments find online, but you cannot move into this penthouse. She went quiet on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her softened. So you are really going to let me car? Fine. Mom. She hung up. Minutes later, Diane posted a long emotional story on her Facebook page. She did not name me directly, but every relative in our circle would know exactly who she was writing about. She wrote about a daughter who had achieved great success and turned her back on struggling family. Screenshots circulated through the family group chat. My best friend Mia called me 20 minutes later, her voice tight with frustration after. Lila, she is painting you as the villain for defending her own house, Mia said over the phone. She is manipulating every single person who does not know. I stared out my rise window, watching twilight paint the Austin skyline deep orange. Outwardly, I still held my home. The passers were gone. But Diane had the battlefield. The fight was no longer only inside 3000. Now it spilled out across families and social media, poisoning my reputation among with. I had won the physical for my condo, but the social came fast. A sharp knock at the door. Not soft tap of a friend, firm insistent rapping. I froze on the sofa. Javier had warned them not to return. My heart skipped a beat as I slowly stood toward the entryway, wondering what fresh confrontation waited on the other side of my locked door. I moved quietly toward the entryway, keeping my footsteps light against the hardwood floor. I did not reach for the deadbolt right away, instead leaning close to the narrow peephole. Relief washed over me when I saw Javier, the head of building security, standing out in the corridor. He was alone, hands resting loosely at his sides, his expression serious but calm. I undid both locks and pulled the door open a few inches. Sorry for the sharp knock, Javier said, lowering his voice so he would not draw the attention of neighboring condo owners. I got a notification from one of our lobby attendants. Your mother and sister haven't left the building. They're sitting in the main floor lobby, talking to anyone who will listen, telling everyone you locked them out with nowhere to go. I came up to give you a heads up before this blows into something bigger. My shoulders sank. Even being escorted out of my penthouse had not stopped them. They had simply shifted tactics, taking their grievance public inside Meridian Towers. I stepped back, and let Javier come just far enough inside the doorway so we could talk without being overheard by passers-by in the hallway. Twilight had fully settled over Austin now, and floor-to-ceiling windows turned the glass walls into dark mirrors, reflecting the lights of my own home back at me. They want to turn the whole building against me, I said quietly. First family group chats, now the lobby. They will keep pressing for Emma to move in unless I put real formal boundaries in place. Javier nodded. I can ask them to leave the lobby prop, but that only keeps them off this building's grounds. It won't fix the family conflict itself. For that, you will probably want legal paperwork, a formal no trespass notice. Once Javier left, I closed the door and locked it in. I paced across my empty living room, my phone still buzzing with occasional angry messages from relatives. Part of me wanted to type out long paragraphs defending every choice I had, to list every dollar I had lent Emma over the years to prove how unfair their accusation. But I knew arguing in those group threads would accomplish nothing. Diane would twist every word I wrote to make me look even more I poured another glass of water and sat down at my kitchen. I pulled up the contact for a real estate attorney I had consulted 2 years prior when I closed on this. My fingers hovered over the call. Reaching out for a lawyer felt like crossing a pain line. Hiring legal paperwork against my own mother and sister made the whole mess feel permanent, like I was officially burning bridges I still wished I could somehow preserve. That old fear in me, the fear that I really would become old, ungrateful daughter everyone was accusing. I took a slow breath and the attorney listened patiently as I walked her through the spare emergency key copied without my consent, the unannounced move-in, security being called, and now the public smear campaign inside my family and within my condo building. She explained what a formal no trespass notice would mean. If Diane or Emma returned to Meridian Towers without my consent, building security could detain them, and local police would be called. It was a lawsuit, but it created official documentation of everything that had. By the end of our call, I had arranged for her office to. I also asked her to compile a brief summary of witness statements from Javier and his officer, documenting the afternoon's events inside Penthouse. After I hung up, I stared at my phone screen for a long time, then went through my contact list. I muted all the chaotic fan group chats. One by one, I blocked incoming calls and texts from both Anne and Emma. It stung. Hitting those block buttons felt like a small loss, even after Anne. For most of my life, I had tried to hold the family together. I had forgiven endless selfish choices, excused bad behavior, given money and time. Now I had to shut that channel down. The next afternoon, Javier delivered printed copies of the no trespass notice to me. He handed one physical copy each to Emma. I stayed safely in my penthouse, though Javier texted me. Diane erupted in rage. We read the papers, raising her voice loud enough for several lobby residents to turn and stare at almost nothing. She just stared down at the print in her hands, face pale, and then glanced up toward the bank of elevators door. That same evening, my aunt sent mail. She told me I was being cruel and excessive, that legal papers against blood were too far, that I should find mine. The social backlash was real. Extended family members were picking sides, and many against me. I stood at my penthouse window watching car headlights stream below. I had shifted from being the victim caught off inside my own home to actively defending myself with legal tools. On my hard line, but this protection at a price. Large pieces of my family's affection and goodwill away from me. My phone message. It was from an unknown number, not blocked yet. The text short and unsettling. You cannot shut us out forever. This is not finished. The unknown number's text burned bright on my phone screen long after I'd locked the device and set it down on the kitchen counter. No name, no context, just a cold, sharp warning hanging in the quiet air of my penthouse. You cannot shut us out forever. This is not finished. I stared at the dark Austin skyline stretching beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, my pulse thrumming unevenly in my throat, trying to place who would send a message like that. Diane was dramatic, loud, and unafraid to use her own phone to lash out. Emma was passive-aggressive, but she'd never hidden behind an anonymous number. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized there was more lurking beneath the surface than a simple family dispute over a place to live. I unlocked my phone again, screenshot the text, and forwarded it straight to my attorney, along with a quick note detailing the timeline of everything that had happened. Within 10 minutes, she replied, urging me not to ignore the message. She explained that anonymous threatening texts could count as evidence of ongoing harassment, and she advised me to log every single unusual interaction moving forward, every strange call, Every odd encounter, every vague comment from family. I followed her instructions carefully, creating a new folder in my photos dedicated solely to documentation, a small but steady act of self-protection. By mid-morning the next day, the family backlash had swelled to a fever pitch. More distant relatives I rarely spoke to chimed in on old group threads, echoing Diane's narrative that I was a selfish, successful snob who'd abandoned her struggling sister. My aunt left a second voicemail, harsher than the first, accusing me of ruining the family's reputation for empty pride and expensive furniture. I'd grown used to Diane's guilt tactics over the years, but this widespread, unprovoked judgment from people who knew nothing of the full story left me unmoored. For decades, I'd bent over backward to be the compliant, generous older daughter, and now one firm boundary had turned nearly everyone against. Mia called me during my lunch, her voice tight with frustration on my laugh. She'd been scrolling through Diane's social media and caught a cryptic comment from a stranger on one of her emotional posts. A short line that stopped. Hope the debt gets settled one way. No one runs from what they owe. This isn't about housing, Mia said firmly the second I answered. I've been thinking about all night. Emma doesn't just need a place to stay. She's running. Her words sliced through the fog of my brain, snapping every nerve in my body to tension. I'd always assumed Emma's constant financial struggles stemmed from her sporadic work ethic and impulsing, quitting job on a whim, splurging on luxury items she couldn't afford, skipping rent for trivial purchases. But it was different. A random stranger referencing debt on my mother's vague, victimized post couldn't be it. I spent my entire lunch hour digging through old text conversations with Emma and distant family members, searching for any clue I'd missed over the past few months. I scrolled past casual updates, the arguments, and half-hearted pleas for money, until I found a short, forgotten text Emma had sent me. She'd asked for $3, claiming she needed to cover a person. When I'd hesitated the cash, weary of yet another loan that would not be repaid, he called me unkind and cut off our conversation entirely. At the time, I'd chalked it up to her usual entitled outbursts. Now it felt like a critical piece of a puzzle I'd listed. I made a risky choice. I unlocked Emma's number, just long enough to send one neutral message. What came from? I expected her to ignore me, to lash out, or to deflect the early. To my shock, she replied within 5 minutes, her text jumbled, frantic, and uncharacteristically honest, no longer hiding behind the hood. It wasn't rent or bill, admitted. Over the past year, she'd accumulated nearly $14,000 in high-interest personal loans and informal private debts to cover gambling losses and impulsive online bets. She'd fallen behind on every payment, and her creditors had started issuing firm deadlines, threatening legal action and wage garnishment if she didn't settle the balance soon. Her lease hadn't fallen through by accident. Her landlord had evicted her after discovering multiple collection notices in it. She'd been homeless and desperate, and Mom had cooked up the penthouse plan. Living rent-free in my luxury condo wasn't shelter for her. It was about saving every penny she had to avoid being sued. My stomach dropped as I read her words over again. Diane hadn't been trying to help her homeless, struggling sister. She'd been trying to hide Emma from her mounting debts, to shield her from the consequences of her reckless choices, and to force me to absorb the fallout of a crisis I'd had absolutely no hand in creating. Every guilt-tripping speech about family loyalty, every action of cruelty, every fabricated story about a verbal family promise had been a calculated lie to protect Emma's stakes. The truth unraveled everything I'd inflicted. I'd spent days feeling guilty for being too harsh, for being family bonds, for defending alone. Now I realized Diane and Emma had never cared for Ernest or family. They'd only cared for me as a shield. Before I could process the weight of this revelation, buzzed again. This time it was a text, the same unknown number, longer and far more menacing than the first. We know your sister's dead. We know you're rich. You can fix this. If you keep blocking us, we'll come straight to your tower. The message sent a cold rush of terror down my spine. This wasn't a family fight anymore. Strangers tied to Emma's unpaid debts now knew my name, my address, financial stability. I texted Javier immediately, sending him screenshots of both anonymous messages and explaining the new debt crisis. His reply was swift and this: stay vigilant. I'm increasing lobby and floor patrols tonight. We've had external people loitering near the tower entrance the past 2 days. My hand cold as I stared at the screen. The danger was no longer emotional or social. It was physical, and right outside my building. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the quiet luxury I'd spent a decade earning, utterly trapped. If I let Emma stay, I'd be enabling her recklessness and opening my home to people who meant me harm. If I kept my boundaries firm, those unknown creditors would target me directly. The family feud I'd tried so hard to contain had exploded into a tangible threat to my safety, leaving me stuck in the worst crisis of my life with no clear way out. The second anonymous text hung over me like a dark cloud long after I'd locked my phone and paced every inch of my penthouse floor. For days, I'd operated on defense, blocking numbers, filing legal paperwork, absorbing family backlash, and trying to outweigh a conflict that refused to fade. But now that strangers tied to Emma's debts were loitering outside my building and threatening to breach my safe space, passive waiting was no longer an option. I was no longer just fighting to keep my home. I was fighting to protect my safety, my privacy, and the life I'd spent 10 years building from ruin. I took a steadying breath and shifted every part of my strategy. Fear had slowed me down long enough. I opened my attorney's text thread and typed out every new detail: the $14,000 gambling debt, the eviction, the 2 anonymous threatening texts, and Javier's report of unknown people lingering around the Meridian Tower's entrance. I asked for immediate next steps, not just formal paperwork, but actionable moves to shield myself and trap the people targeting me. Her reply came within minutes, sharp and tactical. Stop engaging with family drama. Stop defending your reputation. Focus entirely on evidence and liability. The critical mistake I'd been making was treating this like a family fight. In reality, it was a civil harassment case with external third-party threats. She instructed me to preserve every text, screenshot every social media post, log every security alert, and compile a clear timeline of every violation, from the unauthorized key duplication to the ongoing creditor intimidation. I spent the rest of the afternoon building my case file from my kitchen table. I organized Javier's witness statements from the initial trespass, the signed no trespass notice served to Diane, and the screenshots of family smear campaigns, and the 2 anonymous threats. I added Emma's admission about her gambling debts and eviction, finally laying out the full, unbroken chain of manipulation that had led to this moment. For the first time since the invasion, I was not scrambling to react. I was building control. Late in the afternoon, I texted Javier to schedule a quick private lobby. I refused to meet them upstairs where I felt vulnerable. Down in the bright, camera-monitored lobby, surrounded by building staff and public security, I laid everything out. I told him about Emma's, the external critters, and the threatening messages targeting my Javier's expression hardened as he processed the information. He'd initially viewed the incident as a messy, petty family, but now it qualified as a potential residential harassment and safety risk for a tower. We can pull exterior camera footage from the past 48 hours, he told me. We'll log every unknown vehicle and every unidentified error. If they return, we detain them and call Austin PD immediately. This isn't family business anymore. This is trespass and While I solidified security and legal protection, cracks began to show in Diane and Emma's alliance. Desperate and cornered, Emma made a carryover. She texted our distant cousin, begging for a small loan to make a partial payment, and accidentally admitted that Mom had lied about the entire housing dispute. She confessed the verbal family promise was cated, that she'd been evicted due to unpaid gambling debts, and that she'd known moving into my penthouse was unfair, selfish play. The cousin, who'd previously sided with Diane in the chats, was furious to learn she'd been manipulated into bashing me over a lie. She forwarded the entire thread straight to me without hesitation. Overnight, the family narrative fractured completely. Relatives who'd spent days calling me cold and selfish began texting me apologies, realizing they'd been weaponized to cover up Emma's reckless financial choices and Diane's calculated. Diane lost control of her court of public opinion and members. Enraged that her perfect victim narrative had crumbled, she turned on Emma. I didn't need to witness their fight to know it happened. Emma texted me that night, shaky and unguarded, no more defensiveness or entitlement. She admitted Mom had pressured her into this takeover, insisted she'd never meant to put me in danger with her creditors, and confessed she was terrified of the consequence on her. For a split second, me. But I quickly remembered the truth. Emma had gone alongly. She'd moved boxes into my bedroom, lied to my face, and let me absorb days of family herself. Her fear was real, self-inflicted. I replied with one unemotional line: I will not protect my own debts. I will only protect myself. The next morning, my attorney sent over a formal cease and desist letter drafted for Diane and Emma, alongside a secondary harassment notice addressing the unknown third-party creditors. The documents had official legal weight, warning any party from contacting, harassing, or trespassing against me under action. Javier posted a copy of the third-party notice at all building entrances, alerting any loitering creditors that Meridian Towers would pursue charges. The shift was undeniable. For days, Diane had held all the leverage, using family guilt and public opinion to crush my boundaries. She had no public support, no sympathetic audience, no moral high ground to pressure me. Her only weapon, family, got completely. For the first time in this entire conflict, she was the one scrambling to save. I stood at the house window that night, watching the city lights stretch across the Austin skyline, no longer feeling trapped or afraid. I'd turned the corner from desperate survival to deliberate, calm control. But my victory didn't last long. My phone pinged with a new from the unknown number, and this one was different. No vague threats, vague demands. It was a specific, missable ultimatum. We don't care about their family fight. We care about the money. If no one pays by Friday, we're coming inside the tower. No security camera will stop us. The Friday deadline hung over me like a ticking clock, sharp and unescapable. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, the conflict was no longer about family boundaries, petty resentment, or a stolen attempt to occupy my home. It was about real, dangerous people willing to breach a luxury high-rise to collect a debt I never owed. The anonymous text's ultimatum left zero room for confusion. By the end of the week, something had to give. I spent every morning and evening in constant preparation. Javier doubled security patrols overnight, adjusted camera angles to cover every blind spot around the tower entrances, and logged every unknown plate that circled the building's parking garage. My attorney filed a formal police report detailing the harassment, trespass attempt history, and third-party threats, creating an official paper trail that would stand up in court if the creditors made good on their promise. I locked my penthouse safe, double-checked every window lock, and kept my phone ringer maxed, ready to alert security at a second's notice. Midday Thursday, Diane texted me from a new unblocked number. After days of radio silence following her collapsed smear campaign, her message was short, demanding, and desperate. Can we talk? Face to face, no game. I have no one else left. I hesitated only briefly. I knew this meeting would be the final confrontation, the last stand of a mother who'd gambled our entire family relationship to save her younger daughter from her own mistake. I agreed to meet her and Emma in the tower's private ground floor conference room, a neutral, camera-monitored space with no exit shortcut, no opportunity for scene-causing theatrics or hidden trick. I told Javier to stand just outside the door within earshot, ready to intervene if needed. When I walked into the conference room, the shift in their energy was palpable. Diane looked aged and exhausted, her usual sharp, righteous fire dimmed into frantic desperation. Emma sat slouched in her chair, eyes red and puffy, her hands trembling in her lap. There was no more arrogance, no more claims of unfair treatment, no more fabricated family promises. The lies had burned, leaving only raw, unvarnished pain. Diane spoke first, her voice thin and unsteady, nothing like the domineering tone she'd used to steal my keys and justify invading my home. I was wrong, all of it. I lied to I manipulated. I pushed Emma into this mess because I thought I could fix her life before it completely fell apart. She paused, swallowing, no longer able to meet my eyes. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think strangers would threaten you. I didn't think I'd put your safety at. It was the closest she would ever come to a genuine apology. Still, I kept my guard up, waiting for the inevitable plea that always followed her moments of. Emma lifted her head, her voice. They've been calling me non-op. They said if the debt isn't fully paid by tomorrow, they'll press charges and ruin my credit forever. I can't file for bankruptcy now. I can't make the payments. She looked at me with tearful, desperate eyes. Lila, please. I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only one who can stop this. There it was. Final ask. After invading my home, smearing my reputation across the entire family, and dragging dangerous strangers to my step, they wanted me to pay Emma's $14,000 gambling debt to make all the chaos. For a long, quiet moment, I let the weight of everything set on us. The weight of guilt, the publication, the sleep nights, the very real threats. I thought of every loan I'd done Emma, every favor, every boundary I'd softened to keep the family peace. I thought of the penthouse I'd built with years of sacrifice, the safe haven they'd tried to steal. You want to fix this? I said finally, my voice calm. You want me to write a check to erase the... Diane nodded quickly, leaning in her chair, rekindling that old familiar guilt. We'll apologize to the whole family. We'll clear your name. We'll never ask you for anything ever again. Just at Lila. Make this go. I shook head firmly. My decision solid and unwavering. No. The single word landed like a crack of thunder in the small room. Dad's face crumpled. Emma let out a quiet. I have spent my entire adult life cleaning up your mistakes, I continued, my tone steady but unyielding. I've lent I never got back. I've excused your selfish choices. I've tolerated your guilt trips and your manipulation to keep this family together. But I will not pay $14,000 to bail out a gambling debt that put my life, my home, and my safety at risk. That is not family loyalty. That is self-destruction, and I'm done destroying two of you. Diane's desperation flared into one last burst of anger. Her final attempt to control. You're willing to let her ruin her life? To let those people come after all this? Over money? This is not money, I shot back. This is about accountability. You two chose to lie, to manipulate, to break into my home, and to hide from consequences. I did not choose any of this. I do not owe you salvation. I pulled out printed copies, cease and desist order, the police report, no trespass notice, sliding across the table toward them. These documents are final. You will have no further access to my home, my property, or my life. Those creditors come for me. The police and building security have full authority to remove and press charges. If they come for Emma, that is a consequence of her actions. Diane stared at the papers, defeated and hollow. All her power, all her manipulation, all her years of using maternal guilt to kindly failed. She buried her face in her hands, realizing for the first time that no one would her from herself. I stood up to leave, pausing for one final sentence to close the chapter on our fractured family dynamic. I don't hate you, but I will know for you. I walked out of the conference room and shut the door firmly behind me. Family conflict was over. The manipulation was finished. But as I glanced at the tower's shadowed entrance, I knew the dangerous part was still waiting. The deadline was only hours away, and the angry creditor had not backed down. The elevator ride back up to the penthouse felt different. For weeks, every trip to my floor had carried tension, the weight of unspoken threats, fractured family fights, and the quiet fear that my safe home could be unraveled at any moment. But as the elevator chimed and the doors slid open, I stepped out with steady feet. The conference room confrontation had burned the last of my old guilt away. I was no longer the older daughter conditioned to fix everyone's problems. I was just me, finally allowed to protect my own life. Still, the Friday deadline hung heavy in the air. I kept my phone close and stayed in constant contact with Javier while sunset painted the Austin skyline deep indigo. Building security held full alert status, monitoring every entrance, parking lane, and walkway surrounding Meridian Towers. For hours, nothing happened. No strange cars lingered. No anonymous texts pinged my screen. No footsteps echoed in the empty hallways outside my door. Shortly before midnight, Javier sent a final update. Local patrol officers had stationed a casual watch near the tower after reviewing my police report. Word of the documented harassment and active security protocol had spread to the group targeting Emma. Faced with building security, camera evidence, and pending criminal trespass charges, the external creditors had backed off. They had no interest in confronting a secured luxury high-rise and risking arrest over an unpaid private debt. The Friday threat was over. The danger had passed. I sank down onto my living room sofa, releasing a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. The physical threat was gone, but the quiet aftermath of everything lingered. My home was safe, but my family would never be the same again. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself over, and the choice left me with a strange, bittersweet kind of. Over the wind, the last fragments of Diane's false narrative dissolved completely. Extended family members messaged me one after another, offering sincere apologies for judging me unfairly. They admitted they'd been manipulated by a carefully crafted victimry, and they now understood I'd been targeted and exploited. Diane stopped posting on social media entirely. She stopped texting from new numbers, stopped trying to reopen old arguments. With no audience left to fool and no way to me, her guilt-based power was finally. Emma faced the full weight of her consequences. Without me as a fallback, she was forced to negotiate payment plans with her creditors, accept a damaged score, and take on full-time work to chip away her debt. She sent me one final, unresentful text late. I put you in danger for my mistakes. I won't bother you again. It was not a dramatic apology, nor did it ask for forgiveness. It was simply acceptance. The first honest, accountable message There was nothing to say. Repair was able, but healing, and it would never again come at the cost. In the download, I slowly restored the quiet calm of I cleaned up the last traces of conflict, the saved evidence folders, screenshot logs, and legal documents, archiving them securely instead. They were not removed pain. They were proof of how far I'd come. I no longer feared being labeled cold or selfish. I knew the truth, boundary cruelty, protecting myself. Mia came over one evening with takeout and wine, settling onto my balcony as we watched the city. You didn't lose your family. You stopped losing yourself to them. She was right. For years, I'd defined my worth by what I could give, how I could tolerate, and how well I could keep family peace. I'd believed love meant sacrifice. This fight had taught me utter truth. Real love does not demand one person's destruction. A week later, I removed the temporary security alerts from my phone and unlocked the secondary deadbolt I'd kept. The penthouse felt lighter, brighter, truly mine for the first audit. I walked through every room, past the bedrooms Diane and tried to steal, past the hallway where moving boxes had sat uninvited. No anger, only closure. I did not want a perfect happy ending. My family bond was permanently altered. There would be no reconciliation, no easy old normal. But I won something more valuable. I won my autonomy, my self-respect, and the freedom to live for myself instead of for the. It was over. The threats were gone. The lies were exposed, and standing in the quiet safety of built alone, I finally understood that my life was never meant to be a shelter for everyone else's choices. It was mine to protect, mine to keep, and mine to live on my own terms.